All right. I think we're alive and I think we're here. Let me back up. I apologize. I forgot to do one thing, and forgetting this last night, I think cost the stream a little bit of broadband. What happens is that my internet is not satellite anymore, Wi-Fi, but not certainly up to any kind of ground cable and certainly not a broadband speed. So I have to disconnect all my devices from the internet, and then I barely have enough bandwidth. And I forgot to disconnect my tablet last night. I watched the stream and it kind of tripped and burped, and apologize for that. Sometimes I won't be able to control that. But I did get a good video last night. I'm going to upload that to YouTube if you watch it again. But I am not really ahead of myself and not quite beside myself, a little bit behind myself, or I'm all around myself and not centered in myself, which is kind of sort of what we're going to talk about tonight. So welcome to Wednesday night in my living room. Welcome to Inside the Process, and where I kind of draw back the curtain a different way on either aspects of making music or perspectives or experiences of being a musician. And of course, I've done this all my life. It's really all I know. And I hope this is engaging to you, whoever you are, a musician or not. And hopefully I remember to put the proper theme or topic in the description, which is music as a calling. Now, a little disclaimer-ish up front that, of course, everyone's experience is their own, and everyone's journey is their personal journey. And I'm going to be speaking, particularly anecdotally, to my own personal, unique experience. But there are absolutely general themes to take out of this, and whether you're a musician or not. So I hope this is helpful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little tune up front. And I didn't write any notes to say before this tune, so anything I say might be repeating myself later. But I will say it anyway. The music business is not one you go into because it makes sense. You know, it compels you, it draws you, it does something. And maybe I can clarify the something a little bit. Or some of the something, or one of the somethings, or some things. Oh, stop talking, Joe, and play the piano. something like that. You've heard me say before that it is a challenge to be in both of these spaces at the same time. One that can speak intelligently, or intelligibly, or reasonably, or at all, and one who can get in the zone playing. It's kind of two different things going on up here. So it is crowded and confusing upstairs right at the moment. But there's no business like show business, that's for sure. But we're really not talking about show business per se. We're talking about being a musician on purpose. So some years ago, I was a guest in a church, and in my history, I'll talk a little bit about this. I have a lot of experience playing in churches, both in the realm of being on the church staff, and also a lot of traveling and performing in churches. Most of that is in the past, but everything cycles around. And when I was in a church, one of the staff musicians, it was a large church, and so this person was essentially like a minister of music and had a full-time position. And this person was really taken by the idea that I'm actually a full-time gigging musician. And, for all that implies and entails. And we had a little message exchange afterward, and this person said, "You're living the dream." Well, yeah, I never really thought of that. Of course, it's not a dream for everyone, and it's not a dream even for most. But if it indeed is your dream, or the dream you're supposed to be living, then yes, you are living the dream, and it is a dream. It's something, when you're in the space you need to be or ought to be, you're in a space that's going to take you to places that you wouldn't have thought of. And it's a similar thing to what I quote Keith Jarrett as saying, and it's a video I would really recommend. It's him accepting the award at the 2014 Jazz Masters ceremony. There's a lot of things to be learned from that. But in the pre-interview, which he was much more, well, not pre-interview, in the pre-recorded segment, when he got on mic, it was a whole other story, as you could imagine if you know Keith Jarrett. But when they did the video piece beforehand, he said that when my hand is at the piano, it knows what to do. And if I try to tell my hand what to do, I'm stopping it. And not only am I stopping it, I'm stopping it from playing something better than I could think of. Now, it didn't occur to me to draw that example into this. Thank you, Cody. Yeah, I saw that. Huh? I didn't think of using that example, but we're talking pretty much about the same thing. It's kind of related to being in the zone, too. Now, when I am being either flippant or, I don't want to say flippant, but maybe sometimes I am, or just trying to be lighthearted or speak to everyone at once. When you're on mic, you're speaking to the whole room. What I'll say is the artistic temperament, you've heard me say this if you know me, the artistic temperament is either a calling or a disease. Either way, you're stuck with it and you learn to live with it. And then I'm going to go on to say that I choose to see the glass half full, not the glass half empty. I choose to look at this in a positive light, and I see it as a calling. I see it as what I'm supposed to do. But actually, there is more specificity to that. And I was in my early 20s, and I was playing music. I mean, I've described how when I got my driver's license at 17, I started driving myself to gigs, doing students, and I never really looked back or stopped. But there came a point in my early 20s where it's like, I'm not really just doing this because it's by default. Now, that is how I started college. I started college in majoring in music because there was really nothing else happening, and I was expected to go to college. And that lasted a year, and I dropped out for 2. And then I went back on purpose. And these things are kind of working together, as all things do, obviously. So rather than play music by default, I realized this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And when you embrace something as a calling, it changes your perspective. Now, my use of the word calling does kind of touch a term that's used for the clergy or a minister. You know, you have a calling to the ministry, right? And of course, I have a lot of friends who are ministers, and I'm in that realm, and was working solidly in that realm for a long time. And so yes, some of that has rubbed off. But I think there are a ton of similarities, and at some point, other than tonight when I talk about it a little bit, we'll dive into that. You know, being a minister and being a musician, really? Yeah. But the idea of accepting a calling, you know, you're signing yourself up or accepting a life and a lifestyle that's, shall we say, not for everyone. And you kind of submit yourself to that. So I think a traditional Irish hymn actually works here. There we go. Be Thou My Vision. I enjoy playing that hymn. I have it on one of my CDs. Who even has a CD player anymore? Anyhow, that's not what tonight is about. So, I mentioned that I have experiences in the church music realm. I accepted, or more accurately, succumbed to my first church music position when I was 19. And I was like working around the edges before that. And it was a church I grew up in, and it was the expectation of me to become the organist of the church. And I was refusing for a while because I understood what a beast the organ is. Eventually I embraced it, and there I was in that realm. And I started officially when I was 19. And a few years in, we had a new pastor at the church, and he and I became really tight. You know, I used to joke that, you know, we're more like drinking buddies than pastor and music director. In fact, we were going to a board meeting or some kind of thing, walking through the city with some other minister types. And one was trailing behind, just shaking his head, saying, "I don't believe it. A pastor and his music director getting along and talking and joking, and they're friends even. I don't get it. I can't believe it." Apparently that wasn't his experience. But what I learned from this friend, and actually I've seen this in many, is that there are absolute similarities in the temperament of many ministers and musicians. This is a little bit of a side story, but it's a fun anecdote, and it kind of works in here. So he was the absent-minded professor preacher, totally. And he's not the only minister that I played a service for where, even though the service order is printed right in front of him, he gets it turned around, or she gets it turned around, or they play things in the wrong order, or they forget to take the offering, you know, or whatever. And I know one year, and this was a Presbyterian denomination, but not particularly, you know, high churchy. So it wasn't real church calendar oriented like some are. And I was in his office, and he looked down at his calendar, and he got in a panic because he said, "Joe, look, I didn't realize this. Easter is next week." "Oh, good. Thanks for noticing." One time he was over at my house, and we were friends. He didn't think anything of helping himself to one of the brownies that was sitting on a tray on the table. All right, that was fine. Then he comes to me the next day and said, "Joe, I wonder why that brownie tasted so good. We were having a day of prayer and fasting, and I forgot." All right. So I named that the ecclesiastical fog. You know, it's like a sign of the calling for ministry. Of course, it also could be a sign of the calling to be an artist, right? every day inside my head, every day, all the time. So I'm making these references on purpose, and let's see if I can speak this coherently or get it across. Accepting a calling is indeed taking something by faith, whether or not you are a person of faith. Right? So we're not talking about religion here. We're talking about knowing something within and trusting that. And it's related to following and trusting intuition. And this is something over the last decade or so that's really changed the game for me. Where I've come to understand that, or acknowledge, I don't like to use the word understand because it implies we understand. Why do we think we understand? But anyhow, acknowledge that intuition is smarter than we are. And and everybody kind of acknowledges, no matter who you are, when your gut tells you something, trust your gut. And of course, we all second guess it, right? But then you wind up coming back every time to say, man, I should have trusted my gut. Yeah, that's the real thing. And that's something I'm learning to do. And it occurred to me recently, just a couple of years ago, with a decision that I had made entirely from here. And it really turned out that, I kind of like looked into the future and saw it and didn't understand that I did. And I won't explain it. I could explain it, but I will do it a different time. And you would understand the explanation. So I when talking to someone about this, just kind of came out of my mouth this way, and I agree with myself. That sounds strange. That if you want to talk about the subject of faith, a universal connection to everyone is your intuition, the idea of following your gut. That's actually the most basic example that occurred to me of an act of faith. Especially when you hold to that, no, I trust the intuition, right? And that's kind of the realm we're in with this. And it takes it out of the realm of religion to say calling, right? But you basically follow it in here. And then we can say, and most will accept this too, that if you are where you're supposed to be, well, I'm just going to say it, it's true for me, and I believe it's true for anyone who accepts a path that's given to them. If you're where you're supposed to be, you will experience blessings that you would not have experienced otherwise. In other words, it's like Keith Jarrett's thing. Things that you couldn't think of. Because a calling now is about getting outside of yourself and getting out there for the greater good of both yourself and other people, right? And making connections and all of that. And so, even if those blessings are not what you think you want, which is a big part of this and why a lot of people would not go down this road. But those of you who are musicians, and I'm thinking of one in particular who's already commented on this thread, Cody. Cody and I have had discussions about this. I don't know how much we've used the word calling, but he has embraced being a musician, and it's not the normal life, but for some of us, it is our life. So, interesting I brought up Cody. Cody sings this song, so I'm going to hear Cody singing this in my head. Count your blessings instead of sheep. Or along with sheep if you don't mind staying awake. Whatever. So when you are a musician, and I've done this, as you know, all my life. I call myself a full-time performing pianist, even though other things have happened. But like I had a period where I had a lot of teaching, and I've had church positions and stuff. But still, the foundation of everything is me going out and gigging, and that's never been not the case. And that impacts every area of your life. And when my kids were very, very little, especially my oldest, who's going to be 33 this year, right? He had nobody to tell him, differently. So as far as he knew, this was everybody's family's experience, going to gigs with dad and all the things that go with that. Until he got around the normal families and he learned differently. And I'm sure that he kind of helped educate his younger brother and sister, 4 years and 8 years younger, or sister and brother, than him. But those experiences are part of the blessing. It puts you in a place. If you accept to do something, especially as all-inclusive as a career, but it's really more than a career. It's a life you're supposed to lead. It impacts everything. So it's a fun story, especially when Joe Jr. was like super little, and it was just him, and he could go anywhere with us, and he did. He would be at gigs, and there was this one, I think, trad jazz band I was playing with at an outdoor park concert, and for most of it, he sat on my lap. You could do that, right? And he enjoyed that, but he was really, really taken, just like fixed, focused. He probably wasn't two, right? He's focused on the trombone player. He just loved the trombone player. I guess he could have been fascinated by the instrument itself. But he couldn't stop talking about Ellsworth. That was his name, or L. He went by. And he was so enamored with Ellsworth that, I don't know if this was his idea or mine, I think it was his, that one night at bedtime, and I think he was actually still in the crib. Am I thinking right? He was little, right? And he decided he wanted to name his stuffed elephant one of his stuffed animals. A cute little elephant, little petite sort of guy for an elephant, a little sailor suit. And I guess because he had a snout that came sort of out, it reminded him of a trombone. And so when we would play games with his stuffed animals, there would be Ellsworth, or L, the trombone player. I think we called him Ellsworth. So I wasn't thinking, and I went to L and told him that my son was really enamored with you. He just felt the world of you. So much so that he named his stuffed elephant after you. Well, I kind of didn't get the look I expected from L. I think it was the elephant part. So I should have said it differently. So speaking of trombones, see, I'm not telling the trombone jokes, right? Am I doing good? My son, Joe, years later, he introduced me to ska music, which I hadn't heard of or was aware of. He said, "What do you think of this?" And he plays it for me. And the first thing out of my mouth was, "Well, great, a trombone player still gets a gig." 76 trombones in one place today? I'm not so sure. But no trombone jokes. All right, so I kind of opened the door to the idea of like unique family experiences built around Dad being a musician. And so I've listed a bunch of them here. It's kind of fun to recall. One of the things that I just thought of a different story I could tell. Maybe I shouldn't, but anyhow, one of the things we did when Joe Jr. was, from the time he was an infant, was that I would get 2 or 3 weeks of concerts in small churches, most in the Midwest. As it happened, this thing kind of blossomed for me in Nebraska and the Dakotas. Figure that. But of course, I was also this crazy guy who was willing to go out to small churches in the middle of nowhere and go from place to place and stay in people's houses, and that's an adventure. And I mean, you can't say it's a paid vacation, but you kind of can. I've actually got a better example of that. But there's certainly things involved in all of this that wouldn't have happened, and I wouldn't have experienced, and my kids wouldn't have experienced without this. So I think the first year that we went to it was North Dakota. That's right. And of course, North Dakota, which I fell in love with just because it's so open. There's parts of North Dakota that's like you're driving on the moon, and there's no evidence that anyone's ever been there before. No telephone poles going across or anything except the road you're driving on, which may or may not be paved, right? And so we were in a really remote place, where there was a town, but the house we were staying at was outside of town, a few miles of dirt road to get there. And we were just smack in the middle of rural North Dakota. And little Joe, he was 2 or 3 maybe. No one noticed when he walked out of the house at first. Right? And somebody did notice when he got a little ways down the dirt road, and we all ran after him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Well, I want to go home. I'm walking home now." No, you're not. But he certainly recalls those experiences and recalls them fondly. The experience that, as a family, we've all been fond of, we are grateful for, and every musician experiences things like this. Back to Cody, Cody's right in front of me here, so the experiences that he had for going on 5 years in the Glenn Miller Band. Of course, he didn't experience them with his family, and that's a whole nother part of this, that when you have a family, things change, right? And Cody did all this while he was single, and it kind of wouldn't work now. And I'm talking about now adaptations for how I did it and made it a family experience. So the Mediri Brothers Big Band, and back 20, 30 years ago, big bands were still working and people were coming to hear them. And resorts that want to stay viable, to stay open all year, whatever, or they're in seasonal places, and the Jersey Shore is a seasonal place, they'll find special activities to do in the off season, which in the Jersey Shore and the beaches up here is in the winter, obviously. And so this particular hotel, the Golden Inn in Avalon, had package weekends every weekend and could fill the hotel. And it was the only hotel in that town that stayed open all year. And one of the things they did, which wouldn't be viable now, because as I've said before, that demographic doesn't exist. They're gone by and large. But 20, 30 years ago, they were wanting to party. So they come for the weekend. It would be 3 nights. When we did New Year's, it was 4 nights. And there was a few big bands in the rotation, but we did it several times a year. And it would always involve Friday and Saturday night. And almost always it was a family trip. It's like, we weren't in the position. I mean, I haven't really talked about what a musician friend will call the artistic vow of poverty. You know, you don't do this because it makes you a lot of money. You know, you don't go to business school to figure out like, or school to find out what career is a good career choice, and somebody's going to tell you musician. No, you do it because you have to. You're compelled to, or you know, you have the disease, but you know you do it because if you acknowledge it, you're called to it. So anyhow. We all look forward to all of those Golden weekends, even though it was the shore, the ocean in the off season. I mean, the ocean is still there. You're not going to go swimming at it, but you're still going to collect things on the beach. And a lot of things are closed, but not every pizza shop is closed, and not every candy store is closed. You know, and we're grateful for that. And those kind of opportunities, you know, if I haven't said this, and I have no know to say it again, but if, you know, if you're in the place you're supposed to be, you're going to be taken care of. You're going to be provided for, not necessarily in the way that you would choose or even think of, you know. But I got the room. I didn't pay for it. You know, they housed the musicians, and I brought my family, and wasn't that cool? And we all remember that. Another thing was back when I was, for a few years, doing the traveling festivals with the Mediri Brothers. And back like 13, 14, 15 years ago, they were doing a lot more than they are now, but they are still doing some. And I purposed, when I went with the band, I did it for roughly 3 years. I purposed to find a way to take each of my kids to one of the festivals. And it worked out, you know. So each of them got to go and be my buddy. You know, Robert, my youngest, when he was 11, we took him to he and I went out to Decatur, Illinois, for I forget what the name of the jazz festival was. That doesn't exist now, unfortunately. But that was a good one to take him to. It was all indoors. It was in one hotel, and boy, we had a fun experience being snowed in Decatur and not being able to fly home. You know, but it's like, cool, that was a blessing, you know. Or taking Cherie, my daughter, to Mammoth Lakes, California, which was my favorite festival. Unfortunately, that festival doesn't exist anymore either. A lot of these festivals, really all of them, rely heavily on volunteers. And sometimes when the volunteer directors step down, you know, there may or may not be somebody to replace them, in the sense that somebody has that same vision, that same fire in the belly, you know. So things come and things go, right? But we all love Mammoth Lakes, although it was 8,000 and change feet, and you could actually go up to the top of the mountain. It's more like 10. And I never entirely got used to the elevation. Always at some point along the weekend, they had oxygen at all the tents, and I was kind of sucking on the oxygen. I'll save this for another time, but I came close to accepting a musical director gig. This was years later, at a theater in Cripple Creek, Colorado, where the elevation was 10,000 feet. And that scared me, and maybe just for that reason alone, I'm glad it didn't happen. But that would have changed everything too. But man, you know, Cherie still remembers getting to go to California, you know. And I'm hesitant to talk in these terms because I don't, and it doesn't matter. We all live our own lives, but you know, there are plenty of people who can just decide when they want to do something, they have the funds and they do it. They want to go to California, let's go to California, whatever. Not the case here. But those provisions came. And finally, the jazz festival in Pismo Beach, the traditional jazz festival, still exists. And I took Joe Jr., who's now 30, will be 33 later this year, over his 18th birthday. And that was fun. And something that's really cool, actually, is that Joe, who's now married, has a family of his own, he is going to go back to Pismo, because I'm actually going back for the first time since then with the Mediri Brothers this year. You'll see it on my calendar. And other festivals are going to show up there too, most likely. So there's lots of things in the works with me, and that's one of them. So if you go to my schedule, you'll see the Pismo weekend listed. And that's right around his anniversary. So when I told Joe, he's like thinking seriously about building his anniversary trip around that. Because he remembers it fondly. And also, the Mediri band, including me, played his wedding. So wasn't that cool? I'm going to have to admit that I'm a little unclear, unless somebody actually saw and messaged me back. Maybe this person did. Let me just see. Who would have remembered what the first dance was? Because they were deciding between several tunes that I told them about, and of course none of them all hyper. Oh my goodness, I guessed wrong. Okay, so a cousin who sings, sang with the band, and I thought it was one tune, and it's this one, and that makes sense. So thank you, Jessica, for texting me back. So here's what the Mediri band played at my son's wedding for his reception. They were the band he hired. See, again, cool stuff, right? Love is here to stay. Or I think, actually, technically, just Love is here to stay. As far as the title. Yeah, there were several tunes, and I had guessed wrong. And I happen to be Facebook friends with the cousin who is a music teacher and sat in with the band and sang the tune. Said, "What tune did you sing?" And she didn't remember, and she had to look it up, but she could find it. So that was really cool. And hey, man, play my son's wedding. You know, it was cool. He hired. I didn't want to be hired. Not hired. I didn't want to play the ceremony. He didn't want me to play the ceremony. But so we hired other musicians to come in. But I wound up accompanying his aunt anyway. But you know, isn't that cool? You know, isn't the whole thing cool? So to sum everything up as a general statement, and I would give this advice to anyone, and it's not necessarily religious advice. I hope I can speak this in language that everybody can latch on to. Submit or humble your heart. Right? Open your heart. Listen. That's where your intuition speaks. It doesn't speak up here. All right? This figures out what goes on here, and the more it tries to figure it out, the more it mangles it up. Right? But submit your heart, open your heart, humble your heart. Then follow it. Don't follow every impulse. Get in the space. You know, the space where I play. You know, the space where Keith Jarrett says that if he tells his hand what to do, he stops it from doing something better than he could think of. So anyway, that's the experience, and it's appropriate to play another hymn, and this one is a favorite, and it's on my CD with Beth McDonald called All Nature Sings, and it's called I Surrender All. And as I'm playing that, I realize that I completely forgot in the course of things to mention the music therapy arm of my career that came really as a result of understanding this as a calling. And you get in certain realms, and I can say this about activity staffs and nursing homes, you know, there's a calling too, and it's a really special person that devotes himself to that, a very caring person. So the opportunities that we have to be ourselves are there. And, you know, what I would encourage everyone to do is be yourself, make it work to be yourself, and make the unique contribution you can, bless others, and be blessed. Okay. You'll see the link, if you're so inclined, to the support page of my website, where there are options if you want to drop a tip in the jar, or support me on Patreon, which is the same concept, except you will receive monthly exclusive content from me. Time will tell as we go on in future months as I get busier. It's going to be a challenge to keep this going both nights. I fully intend to, unless it's just not viable. So part of that viability is what I've just mentioned. While you're on the website, check out what's going on, check out the schedule, and other things that I continue to update. And I will make events for Tuesday and Wednesday of next week. I will hope to see you then. Thanks so much for being here. Oh, and thank you for dealing with the inferior camera issue. I'm going to continue to use my laptop, and by next week, or hopefully the following week, I'll be able to thread the needle to get a better camera that doesn't shred my bandwidth and mess up the streams. So we're going to experiment with that and getting a webcam. So thanks again. I know where the end video button is. I found it last night. See you again. Thanks. Bye.